Welcome to the Autonomic Healing Podcast. I'm Tom Pells.
And I'm Ruth Lawrenson. We'll be unpacking what it looks like to activate your brain to holistically manage stress and trauma that bring healing to the mind, body, and spirit.
Being free to live authentically as humans.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
Welcome to the Autonomic Healing Podcast. I'm Tom Pells.
And I'm Ruth Lawrenson. We'll be unpacking what it looks like to activate your brain to holistically manage stress and trauma that bring healing to the mind, body, and spirit.
Being free to live authentically as humans.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started. Hey Tom, we are here in 2023. Can you believe it?
It's very exciting.
What's really exciting is that we are in season 2. Like
unbelievable.
A whole new season for a whole new year.
Thank you, listeners, for listening.
I know.
So that we can have a season 2, and there's a reason for it.
And we're so pleased because actually we are, the stories of the podcast have been so encouraging over the last year. I know that you have people regularly telling you, even people who've come to you for therapy, they've listened to the podcast and they found you, or vice versa. And then we just have emails and encouragements all the time. So thank you, listeners. It does mean the world to be encouraged.
Oh, it does.
In this space. And we are enjoying these conversations. And so there is a whole idea for season 2. Do you want to start us off with that?
Sure. The premise for the whole podcast was autonomic healing activation and AHA, and a podcast about that and conversations between you and I about that, along with some guests and having conversations with them. So the first season was really, and it showed, I think, in the very first episode, which is about the tsunami of stress. It's autonomic healing activation is all about what can we do with stress and trauma that is beneficial rather than having it simply be something that is detrimental to us. We began the whole thing with the tsunami of stress. And if you haven't listened to that episode, would really encourage you to listen to that episode or listen to it again.
Do you know it's like the most listened to episode?
Oh, is
episode?
It?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so that was all about stress and need and the dynamics of how that affects us in our relationship with ourselves, in our relationships with others. And then we unpacked more and more of that, looked at how there can be homeostasis, how there can be a normalization of the impact of stress and need through autonomic healing activation in body, mind, and spirit. And along the way, looked at the alternative to the tsunami of stress, which is rational intimacy. Because while the word intimacy doesn't appear in the tsunami of stress, it doesn't mean it's not a factor. It's just not a healthy intimacy that is experienced. It's simply flight or fight. And if you think about fleeing and fighting relationally,
I haven't thought of it like that, but now you say it, I laughed, clearly.
Of course, because it's like, oh yeah, there's a connection there. And that is very much relational.
It's so common.
Yeah, and the tsunami of stress is a relational paradigm.
Yes.
But it's a relational paradigm experienced individually that impacts self and others ultimately.
Yeah.
And that's what the tsunami of stress is about. But that is also driven not just by that flight or fight reaction in the sympathetic nervous system. It's remediated, it's made better, it's healed, greater sense of well-being in the parasympathetic with relax, gonna be okay, recover, rest, digest, and that's homeostasis. And that's a part of that. And then the enteric nervous system is survive and thrive. And from a relational perspective, some light bulbs might go off with survive and thrive and just relationally trying to survive.
Yeah.
And there ain't a lot of thriving going on relationally. Those are the detrimental impacts of stress and need that is not brought to a place of homeostasis. That's the tsunami of stress.
Yeah. And so all of last season, really, we were kind of doing an overview of these are some of the issues that have, we took a deep dive into trauma and specific types of trauma. And then we talked about what autonomic healing does. But it was really about, I guess, understanding the dynamics of stress and trauma and how do we heal. Like that was really the overview of season 1. Would you say?
Yes. And so my thought was, well, what could we do for season 2? And how about we look at the alternative and do a deep dive into that?
Yeah.
Now, bear in mind, a great big caveat is rational intimacy isn't really something that can be thrived in without homeostasis. It's wouldn't it be nice and if only and maybe wishful thinking, but it doesn't mean rational intimacy can't happen and doesn't happen and frankly is a natural development as homeostasis is cultivated. The more we are not in flee and fight, the more we can be rationally intimate and engaged in relationship.
Yeah.
Since we're going to be inevitably engaged in relationship anyway, my thought is, how about we just do it in a way that's healthy and growing and maturing, rather than just trying to make something work that doesn't work. Doesn't mean it can't. It just means that with the lack of homeostasis and the predominance of unmanaged stress or stress that's perceived as unmanageable, that relationship isn't going to go very far.
Yeah.
And may likely become toxic. But there is a rational intimacy. And at this point, I'd encourage you, if you haven't listened to that episode, go back and listen to rational intimacy episode, because that's what it can be.
Yeah.
And so the idea is, let's explore that. What can it be? What might it be able to be like? What is it like? Because that's as natural with homeostasis as the tsunami of stress is inevitable with a lack of homeostasis.
Yeah. So we've talked about this, Tom, how, it's not just, I guess it's like when you don't know what homeostasis is, you need to know what it is. You need to pursue the healing. But once you've experienced the healing of homeostasis, activated, and know how to live in that way, then there's this assertiveness that we can have to explore, pursue rational intimacy in all the different types of relationships that we have.
Assertiveness, empathy, even love. And love's a beautiful thing. And there are different types of it, as you would hope there would be, given that the nature of relationships vary. And there are 4 different types of love, traditionally. We can dive into that if you'd like.
Let's talk about that. I mean, I think it's really helpful because, especially, I was talking to you earlier about this, but just as the new year unfolds, there's such a reflective space in January, I think, for most people, and it's usually about there's a reflection of what's been and a hope for what might unfold. But a big part of that is not just what we've done or accomplished or what we're about to do. A big part of that is relationships. And this is what rational intimacy is all about. But let's talk about those different, there's different types of love. So talk about that a little bit.
And what we've been talking about is the nature of relationship dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
The tsunami of stress is the nature of relationship dynamics that are really unhealthy. And so just to reprise that real quickly, they're in the tsunami of stress, and think of it from the perspective of relationship dynamics. Relationship with self, relationship with others, of whatever the nature of that relationship is. In the tsunami of stress, there's a sense of stress and need, relationally.
It's so true.
And if that stress, that need is not managed, then it can quickly or gradually build over time and years into distress and discontent. And think relational dynamics. There's distress, there's discontent in the relationship.
So I was just going to say, like, for example, you've got co-workers or long-term friends or spouses or children, all of these
relatives.
So you've got a different, so you're in the middle of stress and need here, in the way that in the way that these relationships are playing out.
And as that
and
stress,
there's this pattern that happens.
And as the stress grows and the needs are not met, then that becomes distress and discontent. And where the stress and need is about fleeing, I don't want to deal with, I don't know how to deal with, I can't deal with, I want to get away from the stress and need that's not being met, then becoming distressed and discontented, and that's the fight is on. And it may not be a literal fight, but there's that distress and discontent, and there's the there's the I'm just unhappy about things, and blah blah blah. And the core issue with the stress and need is a sense of inadequacy and insecurity. And we may be feeling insecure about the relationship, or we may be feeling inadequate in the relationship, hence the stress and need. And then when the distress and discontent, the fight starts, the conflict, then that becomes an issue of feeling powerless to do anything about it. And the more you try to do something about it and it doesn't change things, the more powerless you feel and the more distressed and discontented. Think relational dynamics.
So people are in the tsunami relationally a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of the time.
Because nobody lives in isolation.
Yeah. So I guess think about the times where you come home and you're like, disgruntled with the conversation that you had with so-and-so, or the way that someone operated with you or didn't acknowledge you, or whatever it was. These are the things we're talking about. That it's in the middle of this tsunami pattern.
Yep. And then it can grow into isolation and avoidance. That third stage in the tsunami. We just choose not to talk about things. We can't talk about things. That subject is off limits.
Yeah.
We're only going to have surface. We're not going to go any deeper because we can't go any deeper. We're not really sharing at a deeper level. It's just become surface and parallel play like little children would be, your parallel lives. And the core issue there is inevitably about control. Something has it, and we have a sense that we don't. And we experience that sense of a lack of control. Manifested in, if I can't control it, then I'm not going to deal with it. And we won't have those conversations. We can't have those conversations because when we've tried to have those conversations, here's the fourth stage, it's an argument. And there is resistance. I don't want to deal with. Defiance, I'm not going to deal with. And then there's some anger. It can be anger that's directed towards self. It could be anger directed toward the other. It could be anger about the circumstances. It could be anger about the nature of the relationship. And then we're not assertive. And assertiveness takes a hike. And just to reprise that, assertiveness, the paradigm that I created, I like to use, is like two kids on a teeter-totter, except the people on the teeter-totter, on one end is self, and on the other end is others. And the teeter-totter with passive, which is non-assertive, tilts in the direction of the other person. And there's a higher value of relationship on the other person than the value of relationship with self. And one person may become very passive, or they both may become passive.
And there's all sorts of other words for that can seem, we've talked about, sometimes it's like a false humility of, oh, well, I'm just going to be selfless, or,
I'll
whatever.
Defer to you, whatever.
Yeah,
you would
but
like.
actually it's passive, and actually it's not loving yourself.
Yeah, or passive could look like roommates. And just, we're sharing the same space. Or coworkers, but we don't get along. And deferring to the other person.
And just for the British listeners right now, because I know there are some people in Britain listening, a teeter-totter is a seesaw, a child's seesaw, in the old playgrounds that we used to attend. But yeah, seesaw, teeter-totter here.
I won't chase the rabbit trail of why was it called a seesaw? Did I see you and I saw you when it went up and down, or I don't know.
We have lots of that type of stuff in the British
Americans do too. Every culture does. Anyway, so with aggressive, it's valuing the relationship with myself, and I'm going to get mine, and I'm going to have mine. Frequently, that can be because I tried giving everything to you, and that didn't work out very well.
So this is the opposite end now.
This is, and it's highly valuing relationship with self, and I'm not valuing relationship with you.
At the detriment of others. So it would be more like,
aggressive.
More walking over people, or
disregarding.
Not having empathy. And so this is the seesaw, the teeter-totter is now
tilted with self down. The other person's left dangling.
Yeah, okay.
And then there's passive-aggressive. And where passive-aggressive is, it appears to the other person, and it's conflicted. Because there is an attempt, because there is a desire to value relationship with the other person. But that may not be reciprocated, or it may be taken advantage of. It may be manipulated or exploited. And so it's like, well, I'm not going to do passive, and I'm really conflicted. So what's the alternative? I'm going to be aggressive, and I'm going to get mine, and I'm going to have mine. And now it's valuing relationship with self, because that wasn't valued. But then with passive aggressive, now that I've valued my relationship with self and left you out to dry, and I didn't have regard for you, I don't feel good about that. So now I'm valuing that. And it's a really rocky up and down kind of nauseating ride that happens.
Yeah, I mean, passive aggressive is very, it's a common term.
It's very confusing.
And it is that, like, I guess my experience with people in my own life, or when I think we've probably all experienced doing it as well.
Sure.
It's when you're trying to be assertive, but you actually, it's so confusing because you have all of the resentment, and then you're trying to kind of be assertive at the same time. So it's sending very mixed messages. That's what someone would, when someone's being passive aggressive to you, you're saying, you're not being straight with me. Like I'm receiving mixed messages from you.
Right, because the person themselves is conflicted about valuing relationship. With assertive, we're valuing relationship with ourselves and others to the same degree at the same time. Anything else is passive-aggressive or passive-aggressive. And then the core issue with that is our self-image and self-esteem just take blow after blow after blow. They just keep taking hits. And we think less and less of ourselves. And the sense of our self-image suffers more and more and more because we become more and more a caricature of ourselves. And then we just want to feel good. This is the tsunami of stress and the self-gratification. What will make me feel good? And think about the relational dynamics of that. This is where we get maladaptive, and it could be food. It could be shopping. It could be status. It could be relationship with another person. And anyway, my point is that we just want to feel good. And inevitably, if that's not a healthy way to feel good, and even turning something that is healthy into an unhealthy way that we're using it, we just harm ourselves and others.
And so this is the passivity, like, that comes in the tsunami, like the seesaw. You can either be passive, aggressive, passive-aggressive. You have a fourth one that you...
Aggressive-passive.
Aggressive,
I created a category where passive-aggressive is a conflicted value on relationship. I'm trying to value my relationship with you, but I'm trying to value my relationship with me, and I'm just conflicted on when and how to do that. I'm not doing it consistently with both at the same time. Then there is aggressive-passive, which is... it's where the person wants you to think they value their relationship with you, but they don't. They just
so is that like narcissistic?
So. Very.
Yeah. Okay.
Narcissism is very aggressive passive. They only value relationship with themselves. And then functionally, what can I get from you that values my relationship with me? And I'm just going to manipulate and take it.
So it's just very mean.
Yes. And frequently people like that are very highly regarded because the person being victimized seems to think they're getting something out of it, but not realizing that they're just being taken advantage of and left holding the bag at the end. So then relationally, shame, guilt, fear, self-condemnation kick in. And this is all because of unresolved, unaddressed stress and trauma. And when that self-gratification has harmed self and others, we may feel shame, or we may be told we should feel shame and are treated and shamed. Or we may feel guilt because we have violated boundaries, relational boundaries with ourselves, with others, maybe even legal boundaries. It can get to that. That's where criminal behavior starts to kick in. And it's to that degree of guilt. And oftentimes there will be some sense of self-condemnation, beating ourselves up for beating ourselves up, beating ourselves up for being so passive, beating ourselves up for being aggressive and a jerk. Only to have that escalate into, I'm just not going to deal with a relationship with myself or with others. I'm just going to escape that relationship and just do other things that will make me feel good, but are acceptable. And I get some sense of I'm okay from. Then inevitably you got to deal with the harm. And then there's that pseudo change. I promise I'm going to make a change. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be baited into that argument again. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be open, blah, blah, blah. And it's going to be different next time, except it's not different next time because the stress and trauma wasn't addressed. And then the pseudo-normal of let's just get on with relationship and pretend everything is okay. And that can be with self and frequently with others. And there's this it's kind of like the very frequent stories in where everything seems fine in the neighborhood or community, and there's this underbelly of nastiness. And that's
same with families.
That's a trope.
It's like, you know, same thing, right?
And then when it finally maybe hits the surface, it's like, what? Never would have thought. That's the pseudo-normal. And then just additional stresses come along. So that's the tsunami of stress.
Which is what most of us are familiar with.
Frequently.
Like, you know, when you're
because we're
speaking,
humans.
I'm kind of, it's so easy for me to relate.
Oh,
Because I think that has been, unfortunately, our normal.
yeah.
But so what we're moving into in this season
are the perceptions, particularly, that one, energize that and make caricatures of ourselves, what I call seemingly rational perceptions, and unpacking those and looking at the different ones. And how the actually rational alternative perceptions of self and others and situations facilitates and empowers rational intimacy. And that's a thing. And it naturally occurs where there is homeostasis, just as naturally but unnaturally, the tsunami of stress naturally occurs, inevitably occurs. With unmanaged stress, a lack of homeostasis.
And so the perceptions, and we did talk about this briefly in the last season. I think it is in the rational intimacy.
And it was in the problem solving.
The problem solving, that's right. So the perceptions, the seemingly rational perceptions, have come from our story or all sorts of different...
What's been modeled for us, what was rewarded and reinforced.
Yeah, some of the stress and trauma we've encountered. And so we have these seemingly rational perceptions of a situation or of a person, or and often they kind of like feed the tsunami of stress.
Yes.
Right?
And then out of those seemingly rational perceptions, we try to have a relationship and be intimate to some degree.
So just...
AKA love.
So, for example, one, and I'm so excited about season 2 because we actually are going to go into the perceptions in a really deep way. One by one, we're going to go through them. But for example, one of the perceptions, which I think we've mentioned before, is one of mine, which is love me tender, which is a seemingly rational
people pleasing.
Yeah, and so there's this. So a lot of the way that I would interpret my colleagues, or I don't know, it could be anything,
Anybody.
Friendships, you know, kids, whatever. It there's this deep sense of neediness because I need to know that I'm pleasing people, and it never actually closes itself if you allow it to kind of run rampant, you know.
Right.
But there is an alternative there too.
Yeah. And that's being loving.
And that's being loving. That is the rational alternative. And so talk about the rational alternatives of, you know, the perceptions, but also what it leads to, this rational intimacy, because I think it's so, in some ways, Tom, you know, it's easy for us to identify and kind of go, oh, tsunami of stress. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Every day.
Because it's been our lives, you know, but this is more unknown territory. There can be healthy relationships.
That's a thing.
Yeah, and actually I have these perceptions of, and there's all sorts of them, but that actually there's an alternative here where that very thing that is detrimental to me, if I can understand what the actual rational perception is, that can be incredibly beneficial to who I am as a person, what I can bring in terms of love to another person, you know.
And self.
So let's go back to...
So that's rational intimacy.
Yes.
So just to reprise rational intimacy, it begins with a sense of contentment. And if you look up contentment, it's usually defined something on the order of a sense of satisfaction and happiness. I don't think so. I think you can have a sense of contentment and not necessarily be happy. Frequently, if you're doing really loving things for yourself and others, that is costly. And you may not be happy in that moment. If you're experiencing stress and need, you may not necessarily be happy, but you can still be content because you can manage the stress and need. Stress and need are inevitable. If you're a human being living in a relationship with other human beings, living in a world where there's things happening, people do things, diseases happen, economics happen, there's stress and need. That just is. Does that mean we can't be content? No. But it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be happy. So I think of contentment as a sense of satisfaction. That may or may not include a sense of happiness in the moment. But I have a sense of well-being. So I think of contentment with a sense of well-being. In other words, I'm in a state of homeostasis or in the process of restoring it. Yes. So that is the first stage in rational intimacy. So if you think relationally, if you are in relationship with self or others, and you are in a place of contentment or working toward restoring it, that's going to positively affect your relationships.
Yeah.
Because I'm experiencing stress and need, and we may be experiencing stress and need, but I'm not discontented. I'm content.
It takes a huge level of pressure off.
It does. Because then you don't have to be responsible for meeting my need or relieving my stress or situations. I can tolerate. I'm resilient. So that's the first stage in rational intimacy, which has profound impacts on relationship. Then that can grow because of the sense of contentment, and then the stress and need can actually promote a deeper relationship. That's a lovely thing, especially since stress and need is inevitable. The stress of personal growth, taking on additional responsibilities, all sorts of things, learning more, growing, advancing. That's stress. And there is a sense of need, but it's not experienced as coming from a place of discontent. It's experienced as a sense of contentment, which then, with those challenges in life, those opportunities that present themselves, relationally, professionally, interpersonally, etc., then the second stage in rational intimacy can show up, which is grace. Gifting. Your gifting comes to the fore. You rise to the challenge. It's a sense of I'm more me, and I'm a growing me, and I'm a growing me with thee. And it's a we, and it's all these wonderful things, because the gifting and the poise, this is challenging, but I'm rising to the challenge, and look at this wonderful things that can come from what was creating the stress and need to start with. And then that sense of stress and need with contentment, we feel secure and capable. Yeah, I got this. I can do this. And then with the grace, the gifting, the poise in relationship with self and others, that's very empowering. I can do this. Yeah, let's do this. And then the third stage in rational intimacy is engagement, connection, deeper involvement. Not necessarily that's not messy. Of course it's going to be messy. We're dealing with human beings, for goodness sake, in situations that the situation may be very, very challenging. But there's a sense of engagement. Let's get on with this. Let's connect. Let's do this together. And it's a win-win situation. And I'm in it to win it, and etc. All those kind of phrases show up. But that's about the connection. The engagement with the situation, with the person, with the dynamics, then that can grow into a sense of the fourth stage of rational intimacy, which is devotion and a commitment to a cause or a person. And that person can be you. It can be someone else. It can be a commitment to people, a we. It can be a commitment to a cause. And that can be wonderfully empowering and helps with a sense of an increased sense of self-image and self-esteem. And it's not an issue then of control, because when we engage and we connect, that's not control, that's influence. And we become much more influential in our own and other people's lives and in situations. And we're influential that way. That's where the devotion kicks in with, and as we are influential, our self-image improves. and our self-esteem, our sense of worth increases. And then we're looking for what are the opportunities? And it's not a fantasizing of, oh, this would be so good and it would make me feel so good. Mm-hmm. It's more a sense of envisioning. What are the possibilities?
Yeah.
What else can be there? How can this situation or this relationship be improved? Mm-hmm. How can we grow and mature? And it's an envisioning of possibilities. And that in turn gives us a sense of feeling even more secure and capable. And then we step out into that. We want to see that come to life. We want that vision to become reality. And we use our gifts and capability to be involved in the creation of that. And that comes into being. And then from there, we can experience in rational intimacy that sense of commendation. Well done. And we can hear and internalize when other people give us that sense of, well done, congratulations. And we can also communicate that with ourselves. Man, that was good. I did good.
Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah. And
feel good about ourselves and our contributions, which naturally leads into that last stage of rational intimacy, which is motivation. That's awesome. Let's do more of this. Yeah. I want to do more of this. And as the opportunities increase, stress and need naturally increase, but it's not a detrimental, debilitating stress and need. It's an opportunity to be embraced with a sense of contentment of, okay, next level, here we go.
Yeah.
And that's rational intimacy. And all of those things are functions of and function in relationship. And the ancient Greeks had 4 different terms for intimacy, 4 different terms that are used to describe love.
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis famously had some radio broadcasts in the 1950s, some of which got a little bit of criticism because they were pretty racy at the point. Anyway, my point is he talked about these 4 different types, but they go back into the ancient Greeks, and they had 4 different essential concepts of love, of relationship, of intimacy. Different people in different contexts expressing love. And shall we go into that?
Yeah, okay. Let's do it. We brought it up right at the beginning, and so but it's been so helpful to just get that overview again, because we are really launching into rational intimacy. So thank you for sharing that. But yeah, let's talk about these 4 different types of love, because they really represent the different types of relationships that we will have in our lifetime.
In rational intimacy, played out in different settings.
In different ways.
In different situations. So one of them is called storge. And think family bond. We are family. That's storge. Okay? There's this, it's a naturally occurring bond, although because of stress and trauma, it may not happen. But it's the family bond of siblings when they're not fighting. It's the family bond of parents and children when they're getting along and it's a healthy relationship. But we're family.
Yeah.
And we have a bond and we have a connection, and that's storge love. But it's that family love. Yeah. It's that bond. And that can include others who may or may not be technically family, but they're family. And that's storge. Then there's philia, like Philadelphia. Philia is friendship or attraction or affection. And we think of friends and acquaintances in the category of philia. They're not family, but they're friends. And that's what philia is. And then there is eros, which is passion, desire, romance. It's that sense of a deep attraction and connection with the other person that is romantic, that is can lead to a bonding very deeply and intimately between the two. And then, because if you don't have eros, you may or may not have procreation. Then the species doesn't continue. And so it's in that category of things. And then there is agape, which is a fourth type, but I think of as different than the other three. So it's like, think of the other three as a way of relating. And this fourth, agape, is the nature of the relating, the character of the relating, which can be truly loving. And agape, many people think, well, it's the greatest type of love. It's, like I say, it's like the stuff of love, not necessarily a love. But, and I'm going to get pushback from that from the linguists, I'm sure. But anyway, so agape, the way I would talk about it and define it, is a commitment to love regardless of circumstances. Agape is commitment to love regardless of circumstances. And if you look it up, you'll often see it associated with selflessness, self-sacrificing, and that sort of thing. I don't think that's necessary, and I'm not even convinced that's necessarily terribly helpful to think of from a rational perspective.
Can you just explain why?
Yes. Remember win-win and assertiveness? That's highly valuing relationship with others. Well, I'll use an example. If I was in a position as a parent where my child's life is threatened, I'm willing to sacrifice my life for that child's well-being. I mean, this is just like, it's going to happen. Which doesn't mean I'm more highly valuing my child's life than my own. Because if I don't sacrifice my life for my child's life, what am I saying about how I value their life or mine?
Yeah, how could you live with yourself?
I can't live with myself.
So in some ways it's just showing that how much you do value yourself by sacrificing your life.
My life is worth sacrificing for my child's well-being. The other side of that is I get to, and let's say I'm willing to sacrifice my life, but it didn't actually cost me my life in the end, but I put my life in danger. I love and respect myself for that. To me, that I'm dad. That's being a dad.
Yeah.
And if I can enrich my child's life, not at my own expense, that's not necessary. It's a win-win situation. If it's not, then I wonder if it's not really even love. Is it love to more highly value someone else's life than your own? Because love is valuing life. Love is valuing a life. And valuing it to the point that I'm willing to lose it.
Valuing your role as a dad. Yeah.
As I am losing my life, I'm gaining my life. So I'm not really losing it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because I think people do have that sense of, it's selfless love and, I'm
sacrificing for my...
But there's a false humility in that in some ways. And it's that love, or that the love is a connection. It has to have the two parts.
Or worse, it's incredibly manipulative because then the other person feels like they owe you. That's not love.
So agape then is, so talk more about that. A
commitment to love regardless of circumstances. Which is, I think of agape like a coin, and there are two sides to the coin. And the other side of the coin of commitment to love regardless of circumstances is the question of what does love look like given the circumstances? If I am committed to love regardless of the circumstances, well, the other side of that same coin is, well, what are the circumstances? Given these circumstances, what does loving look like?
And how do I love within these circumstances?
How do I love within these circumstances? Because I'm committed to it. So that's agape. And I think that agape informs then storge and philia and eros.
So agape can be in those three.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Because, for instance, with philia, there's a verse that says, there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Well, is that storge family? Or is that philia? It's both. Together. Blended together. A friend that sticks closer than a brother. We can have friends who are more sibling than our siblings are. Yes. That often happens. And there are siblings who are more friend than sibling. They just are. And as far as the eros, that bonding that is between two people, where two become one. Yeah, can be agape in its best expression. That attraction and bonding that comes and is a commitment to love regardless of circumstances. And then what does love look like given these circumstances? And then think of rational intimacy as that plays out. Yeah. In friendship, in family, in romance, and mating or connecting intimately. Now we're talking life. And that's the stuff that makes life beautiful and wonderful. And that's rational intimacy. And to have that, not just with others, but with ourselves. See, we often think that if we don't have this other, we can't be content and okay. We can't love single. Sure. Why not? It's a person. It just happens to be ourselves. And we could do that. And then we're available for a relationship as they come along and as it would be a win-win situation and it would be beneficial. So that's rational intimacy and characterized by different natures of love.
So good, Tom. There's so much in there. I feel like I'm absorbing it as we're talking. And, you know, we will go into we're kind of going to be diving in and out of these like little spaces in that big umbrella that you've just kind of given a fantastic overview to. But relationships are so important. You know, we know that that's so important to us. Even if we're in denial and we want to, like, I'm done. We've all probably been burnt by people and burnt people, you know, in our lifetime. And yet there's this, what we want to do is take you guys on a journey with us to explore rational intimacy, the different stages, and we're going to be opening up the perceptions.
And that's the critical piece.
The perceptions.
Perceptions are our reality, but if they're not actually rational perceptions, we're not dealing with reality. Yeah. And the perceptions are all the difference between whether we are in the tsunami of stress, which is a function of the seemingly rational perceptions, as opposed to rational intimacy, which is a function of actually rational perceptions. We're capable of both. We have both. With unmanaged stress, or stress we perceive and need we perceive as unmanageable, it's just an invitation to be seemingly rational, and off we are into the tsunami trying to breathe underwater. Or we manage those, we recognize them happening, we change them, and then we're actually rational, and then rational intimacy just naturally occurs. And we get to choose. We just frequently don't realize we have that choice. Yeah. Or know how to make it, or have even the way our brain naturally functions as an ally.
And I think just even recognizing what those are, and the fact that there are alternatives is so, like, for my own journey, I'm just thinking of my own journey in this space. But, you know, just knowing that information, knowing that there are alternatives, knowing there's a healthy way, knowing that there's a place where I can actually live in relationships rationally rather than this crazy tsunami of stress, has been so helpful. Do I stay there all the time? Not all the time, because we switch.
I was going to say, if you found a way to do that, please tell me, and then I'm just going to start having conversations with you, because no.
But this is what we're going to go into in this season over this year, and just we're excited about this because this is life. This is so life-giving, to be able to relate with ourselves, others in this type of way. It will bring change in such a beneficial way. So all of that to say, we're going to wrap this episode up right now, but we are super excited to dive into rational intimacy, the perceptions, and how it can be such a life-giving space relationally as we, journey on.
Yeah. You've been listening to the Autonomic Healing Podcast.
Join us next time as we continue in our conversations with Tom. If you're interested in pursuing your own autonomic healing journey and want to find a practitioner, visit our website, innerworkings.org. See you at the next episode.
You've been listening to the Autonomic Healing Podcast.
Join us next time as we continue in our conversations with Tom. If you're interested in pursuing your own autonomic healing journey and want to find a practitioner, visit our website, innerworkings.org. See you at the next episode.